Hello, everyone. I'm Jason Marzek, Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's Adrian Arsh Latin America Center, and welcome to today's Expert of the Americas interview. I'm delighted to introduce our guest today, Karim Lesina, Executive Vice President and Chief External Affairs Officer at Millicom. Karim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Jason, thanks for the invitation.
Great to have you here. Now, before we start, a few words on the context for this interview. The Adrian Arsh Latin America Center focuses on Latin America and the Caribbean's strategic role in a global context with a priority on pressing political and economic issues that are going to be defining the trajectory in the years ahead. And at this moment, we are committed to helping the region use the COVID pandemic as an inflection point for leapfrogging economic development. As part of this process, we have partnered with the Inter-American Development Bank to help us better understand the opportunities and challenges that the private sector sees in the region. Of course, as well as the critical role of the private sector in supporting economic recovery and long-term prosperity in Latin America and the Caribbean. This interview is part of a conversation series with private sector leaders across Latin America and the Caribbean on these topics. Insights from this interview today and other interviews will provide further input for forthcoming Adrian Arsh Latin America Center IDB reports. Today, we focus on Millicom's perspective and the broader telecommunications space. So once again, Karim, thank you for joining us. And with that, let's begin. Earlier this year, Millicom announced that it would invest around $3 billion in Latin America by 2025. What are some of the unique factors for you that make this region such an important market for Millicom, especially when compared to other regions?
Thanks for the question, and thanks for organizing that. It's every time super important, Jason, that we give a focus on our region. And when I talk about our region, for us in Millicom, it's about the countries that are in Central America, Colombia, Paraguay, and Bolivia. You know, we are the smaller one, right? We are not in the big countries that attract all the time the interest. We are in what we call our hidden gems. You know, countries with pretty stable macros, country with huge opportunity. And the reason why we really decided to go into these huge investments that we have announced, that we are continuing, and we have been investing really in the past years and consolidating into Latin America. We were in Africa, we decided to focus only on Latin America. And there are different reasons for that. You know, a region that we see with a huge amount of opportunities, countries where you have a good level of connectivity, but still not a good level enough of adoption, meaning a lot of people have potentially access to the technology, but they're not using it enough. So we're going to see how we can work on that. And I think we're going to talk about that later. And specifically a very young population. A very young population is something essential. You know, people are more technological savvy, they focus on it. So I think these are really the main point, you know, potential growth, huge opportunity. We saw that during the past few years, you know, huge interaction with the US, not only for the remittances that are coming from the US to those countries, but also for the geopolitical factors that get Central America even more important. And at the end, one thing that we often don't look at it is really the macro stability is really important. You know, if you look at most of the countries, some are dollarized, so it gives us a good level of stability compared to what you have in other part of the region. Some others have very good macro. You know, Guatemala is one of the great examples on how the quetzal has been able to be so stable compared to the dollar in the past years, low indebtedness, pretty strong economics. So those are really the reason why we are really focusing all our efforts in our 9 countries.
So macroeconomic stability, the opportunities that are presented, and young populations too, that are great potential consumers. Lots of opportunities. Of course, with opportunities, there are also challenges too. So Karim, what are a couple of the, maybe 1 or 2 key socioeconomic challenges that you see in the region? And then also, how has Millicom sought to address some of those challenges?
Look, I raised one of those challenges in the first comment, right? It's we look at the region, you look at the broadband availability, and you see that broadband availability are pretty strong. And then you look at usage, and you see that usage is much lower. What does it mean? It means that people have potentially access, but don't see yet the value of the world digital connectivity. And I think this is something we need to work with the governments, with the organization like yours, with the IDB, in order to have projects that help people to understand how technology and connectivity can change their life, how they can get a better job, how they can have more opportunities instead of migrating, of creating new opportunities in those countries. I think that's going to be super important. And it requires really a collaboration between the private sector and the public sector, because we are talking about education projects. We are talking about a government that needs to digitalize all their work, because the biggest incentive, we saw that in countries like Estonia, Latvia on the European level, but also in some of our countries in Latin America, we see that the more the government digitalize their service, the more they give availability of every kind of information or access to documents on the digital side, the more people have an incentive to connect and to try to use more internet. That's going to be the first big one. The second big challenge that we see is bancarization. Today, you still have a big difference in the region between people that are bancarized and non-bancarized. And I think that's one of the things that we need to address altogether. You know, we were talking about that in LA last time we were together, Jason, of the fact of the importance of trying to find a model to use connectivity to give access to the non-bancarized people to the digital economy. You know, to develop new products that allows them to have access to, you know, just the possibility to do transactions that are not in cash, but also to get into the digital economy thanks to this semi-bancarization, if you want to call it. This is really something that we are looking at a lot of attention. We have a huge service that we call Tigo Money that we're trying to push, that has been very helpful during the pandemics in countries like Paraguay or Guatemala, in order to help the governments to distribute funds to communities that didn't have access to a bank account. And that showed really the opportunities that we have in front of us. I would say those are two pretty good challenges. And probably the last one that I would like to focus is we are economies that still depend too much about one or two specific sectors. Some are the textile, some are agriculture, super important sectors for the local economies. But we saw it in a lot of the other countries. Diversification is essential. So we need to see how to promote more digital marketplace, digital opportunities in the region. And I think what's best than the US as an example for those countries, because of the huge amount of immigrations coming from those countries, to be the example of the lessons that we could learn in order to develop these new markets. You see a huge desire in some countries to focus on that. You know, El Salvador has been doing a huge project, a huge program in order to promote computers for every kids. Panama has been working a lot on digitalizations. Colombia is a role model with Paraguay too. So I think there are a lot of opportunities in front of us that we just need to work together.
Yeah, Karim, those are excellent points. You identified a number of key challenges in the region, as well as kind of how technology and the role of Millicom can help to address those, transparency with digitalization and really bankability of populations. Now, Millicom's Tigo partnered with IDB Invest at the beginning of this year to guarantee a line above 137 million to be used for technology advancements in Colombia specifically. And that kind of begets a larger question of what you see insofar as how the public sector and multilateral organizations like the IDB can help to make the region more business and investment friendly for in general, but specifically for Millicom, and how can partnerships with organizations like the IDB accelerate those investments in the region?
So look, I think IDB is a role model on this, not only for the role that he plays in the region, but also for the knowledge that IDB has of the region. And I have to be honest, the project in Colombia is a great one. We really appreciate what they've been doing, and we are going to focus on it. But when you look at the wider question of the PPPs, I think this is something that we need to look more for different reasons. First, our countries, and I think that's valid for almost all the countries of the region, have a similar situation between urban and rural. So you have urban areas, very, very dense, where most of the economics goes through. And then you have rural areas where most of the people have a tendency to either emigrate from the rural areas or have a lot of challenges for connectivity, access to financing, access to banking, and etc. So that one, I think, is essential. Working together to allow or ensure that even in zones where there is no really capacity, or there is no real reason to put a network because economically speaking, it's not viable. This is where we should work together with PPPs. We have done some incredible project, for example, in Panama, where we have been collaborating with the government of President Cortizo in order to open some new antennas, in the most, remote comarcas of Panama. What was the most impressive part of it is that the moment that we turned on the antenna, people already had a phone, because they had, even if they had no connectivity in their country, in their zone, they had to have a phone when they were going to the closest city and etc. So the reality is that the usage spiked super fast. And the second part that was even more important is that thanks to the connectivity, they were able to access to education projects, and their school were able to be connected to internet, making a huge difference in their daily life. I think this is something that we need to work on. The second thing,
that's really, really important, Karim, and a really great example of not only Colombia, but you mentioned Panama as well, kind of the role that the partnerships can play, and specifically multilateral banks like the IDB, and being not only instrumental on the financing side, but also on the knowledge development side.
Look, Jason, even a center like yours that have so much knowledge, the fact that the possibility for kids or high school or even university in those countries to have access to the knowledge or to the great projects or programs that, for example, the Adrian Arch Center does. This is essential because you open the mindset to people. They are not going to think all the time that the only way that they can have access to knowledge is to emigrate to the US or to Europe. Because this is a reality. If we really want to help those countries to get faster economic growth, we need to be sure that we are able to retain the best talents in this country
100%.
in order to develop those local economies. This is the most important part, because if the best brains leaves and then create a company, or in Silicon Valley or in Boston, even here in Miami, this is great for us as people living in the US, but you are taking out an opportunity of growth and of new jobs in those countries. And this is something we really need to work all together.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And also, of course, always appreciate the plug for the great work of the Adrian Arch Latin America Center. But very fundamental to our work is how to make sure that the ideas that we're generating and the insight that we have are shared not just with the decision makers and other key people, but also with much broader constituencies. Karim, now business models and customer needs, of course, have evolved throughout the pandemic with accelerated digitalization, questions about supply chain restructuring. So a lot of potential long-term implications, specifically on accelerated digitalization. And we've already talked about this somewhat, but how is Millicom adapting to the changes that you're seeing now because of the pandemic, but also that you're expecting to see moving forward?
So look, the best news of the pandemic was that the network have been able to help people to stay connected and to continue to almost have a normal life, at least for the people that were connected. So it shows how much technology is important and how technology creates huge opportunities. Okay, that's the good news. The bad news, it shows how much people are dependent about technology too, meaning that we need to be sure that, as we said before, we connect more. And we try to connect everybody. And hence, that's the $3 billion investment that we announced, okay, to show that we are going to do our part and we are going to invest in really the next generation networks in all our countries. And we need to be sure that everybody does the same. But to be honest, most of the operators in the region are investing pretty strongly and are creating really the digital network of the future. So this is the very, very important part. But what we are also seeing, and I think it's very positive, is a transformation in general of the region. You start seeing more and more potential existing unicorns or future unicorns that are getting created in the region. You saw that in Colombia, you have some in Argentina, Mexico is pushing. So we need to see how we can help that develop, how we can create more of those opportunities. Connectivity is key, okay? Everybody needs this. Education is key, as we discussed. But now we also need to have those rules of the game that we are sure that everybody will respect. So modernization of the rules for external financing, being sure that the financing that people can find in those countries are competitive compared to the financing that you find in the US. Because if you're a young entrepreneur and you get a financing that is 3 times best in the US compared to your country, obviously you have a tendency to immigrate. So this is something where banks can really help, but also developing bank institutes. We need to work really with the objective of creating new center of growth. Obviously, this will be important for us as a company. I think it will be important for everybody. But think to it. You have companies like Globant that have been developing in an incredible way. You have the local squares in Mexico. You have incredible e-bankings between Brazil and Colombia. Companies like us, but even our main competitor, America Moria, are doing the right thing. So I think we need to learn one thing from the pandemic. Yes, and you have been insisting on that. Working together. That's develop the rules of the game.
Karim, that's incredibly important. Look at those rules of the game and kind of how the unicorn potential in the region is just phenomenal. So how do we ensure that those unicorns can grow and can thrive in the role of Millicom in that regard? And that brings me to the last question, which is in response to Vice President Harris's call for action, Millicom's Tigo revealed plans to invest $700 million into its Central American mobile and broadband networks, which is an important investment and goes to Millicom's priority on enhancing regional development and economic development. How do you see closing the digital inclusion gap fitting into broader priorities in the region?
So look, our priority, if you look at our website, is very simple. It's to build the digital highways that connect people, improve lives, and develop communities. This is our priority. This is the mantra of Millicom. Everything we do is related to that. And joining the VP Harris call for action, it was really something, being the biggest investor in the region, we had to join the call for action. We really commit, and we are going to work together with the Partnership for Central America to show really the huge opportunities that are present in those 3 countries, but in general, in all our region. Okay, as I say all the time, there are 2 Latin Americas, right? There is a Latin America of the big countries that everybody look at all the time, and there is the other Latin America of countries that people have a tendency of not knowing, but are spectacular. You're talking about incredible, beautiful countries that are hidden gems that we really need people to discover. Okay, the reality is we have been talking about this, right? The digital inclusion gap is really the most important thing that we need to focus on, at least on the technology side. But I think in general, because we saw it, that the best way for a country to grow today is really to take digitalization as the top priority. Let's use Estonia as the best case example. And people will tell you, Karim, you're crazy. It's a so developed country now. But let's remember where Estonia was coming from when they decided this world project. And as part of the digitalization, Estonia also had some clear rules, clear structure on rule of law, clear structure on getting the most modern regulatory framework in order to attract as investor, clear framework on getting authorization for work, attraction of talent, being sure that the people were staying, and also digitalizing all the public service so you can do everything in Estonia in less than a day. This is a role model.
It's a great role model.
And we should never believe that the role model is not impossible to copy. Yep. Because we need to look at that, and obviously every model needs to be adapted country by country. But the reality is that we have to learn from it. I hear so many times, I want to develop the new Silicon Valley, I want to do this, I want to do that. We should look at our market on a national basis and decide, how can I attract my investors, international investors, but also local investors? How can I convince the young talents of Tegucigalpa to stay in Tegucigalpa instead of potentially moving? This is super important for companies like ours. So we keep those talents in order to continue to grow the country.
Karim, I think that's incredibly important. That's a great way to end our conversation. I want to thank you again for joining us for this Experts of the Americas interview and for the incredible insight and the great work of Millicom.
Thank you. Thank you for organizing all this, Jason. This is great. You're doing fantastic to the region.
Thank you so much.